The whole kind of video nasties phenomenon was really brought about by a loophole in British censorship laws, whereby the fairly new technology of home video wasn't covered by existing rules. This enabled some distributors to sneak through some quite nasty and gory films which were then going straight into people's homes. This is picked up by the tabloids as corrupting children, encouraging deviant behaviour, and suddenly you have a whole furore, you have a storm of fuss about these so-called video nasties.
I don't know what a video nasty is. I don't think certainly nobody at the time knew what a video nasty was, and it's a very vague and unclear kind of term. There's no kind of definitional criteria to say this is a video nasty. When the Video Publication Act was brought in 1984, it wasn't specifically targeted at video nasties. It was more kind of films that were considered obscene. Now the term video nasties maybe originated in 1982, and people associate it with Mary Whitehouse, the kind of staunch anti-porn campaigner of the 1970s and 1980s. And there is a story that Go Video, the distribution company behind Cannibal Holocaust, sent her the video with this kind of faux outrage letter that this film cannot be shown, in a way to generate kind of free publicity, and it kind of backfired because it brought about this term of the video nasty, which was then picked up by the tabloids, in particular the Daily Mail, Sunday Times and The Sun, and then that carried through to this legislation that was put through in 1984. So even though it was videos in general, it became the video nasty. It's a majority of horror films, mainly American and European, Italian, but there are some kind of odd choices. For example, behind me you can see Foxy Brown. Foxy Brown is not a horror film, it's a blaxploitation from the early 70s, starring Pam Grier. That was on the list of the non-prosecuted video nasties titles. And there were other films that weren't on the list as well. New York Ripper, Lucio Fulci's very controversial kind of slasher film, wasn't on the list, although it was banned. So there's some very odd kind of choices that would make it on there. But the term video nasty became a very useful way of kind of generating this moral outrage. The difference in landscape, I think, from the contemporary period we find ourselves in now in 2018 to that in the early to mid 1980s. So today, for example, if a film was submitted to the BBFC, which is considered kind of dangerous or threatening, or has kind of very strong content and pushes the kind of threshold of public acceptance, then they can often exercise the film, they can cut it, they can censor it, or they can reject the movie. So we've had like a Serbian film recently that I think was almost 4 minutes cut out of it, which was unprecedented. You know, they have to go back to the early 90s and the 80s for a film to have been censored that much. And we've also had films that have been rejected, such as Hate Crime and Murder Set Pieces and The Bunny Game, because they've been unpalatable for kind of public consumption. My point is that even though those films have been heavily cut or rejected in some cases, it's still easy to get hold of them. And I think through legal means, we can go on the internet, we can find places that sell those films on DVD or Blu-ray. Back in the early to mid 1980s, when these films were on the kind of Department of Public Prosecution's list, they were withdrawn from circulation, they were gone, they disappeared. And there wasn't any legal opportunities to get those films. And I think we have to just bear that in mind, how different the two landscapes, the two historical periods are.
Yeah, of course it's overblown in some ways. It's that kind of classic British tabloid stalwart. The Daily Mail was at the forefront of whipping up a scare. And what does it do? If your children are going to be corrupted by demons emerging from the screen and turned into murderers and sadists, then that's the kind of thing that sells newspapers, right? So that's absolutely a part of it. However, it is absolutely stemming from a problem, a genuine kind of loophole in British law.
At the start of it, it seemed as if this was a campaign to protect the kind of moral integrity of the citizens of the United Kingdom, in particular children who may be exposed to these type of films and hence corrupted by their violent or sexual content, and in turn then to kind of strengthen the sanctity of the family and not make it this corrupted space through watching these videos. But when you scratch a little deeper, you realise that it was a very, very much a political and ideological campaign. It's not based on evidence. It's not based on research. So no research was consulted about media effects, what these films might do to people. And which kind of links to the fact that nobody really knew what a video nasty was. Our politicians at the time said that these films were so awful, so violent and depraved, that existing research couldn't be applied to them. And furthermore, not only was that research kind of not applicable, any research just couldn't deal with these films because they were so violent and so awful. So all the research, all the experts were rejected. This notion of picking out these particular films on video as a kind of folk devil. You know, that if you watch them, you're going to be instantly corrupted and you're going to potentially turn into a murderer or a rapist, and the country is going to go to ruin. It was mainly ideological, mainly politically driven, primarily because the Conservatives were coming up to a general election in 1983, and they used the form of the video, and in particular these violent films that were part of the kind of home entertainment in the early 80s, as a way to promote their agenda going up into that election, in particular around this idea of being tough on law and order. And that was coming under threat at the time in places like Liverpool, where it felt that the Conservatives weren't doing enough to protect, to uphold law and order. So this became a useful way of saying to people, look, we are actually the party of law and order. It must have been like 81, 82, so I was about 8, 9. And a friend of mine said that their parents had got this horror film now, because he kind of heard it, I guess, from downstairs, and that we should go around at dinner time and watch it, because his parents were out at work. So we actually did do what the Daily Mail said, this is what's going to happen, there's violent films, all these kids are going to watch it. So we went around and put it on, so we got there, we had about 20 minutes to watch this film, and I remember fast forwarding it through it, and the film turned out to be, I didn't know at the time, but I can remember very clearly these dismemberment scenes in a kind of a hospital surgical setting. Was Andy Warhol or Morris's Flesh for Frankenstein. And I remember when we were fast forwarding, trying to get to the good bits, that just seemed again, I just found it very dull. It's a film that doesn't appeal to an 8, 9-year-old, and so rather than being damaged or affected, we were just kind of turned off by it. Went back to school and carried on. When I immersed myself into it, so to speak, when I was about 15, 16, then it was really reading about it. So reading about these films years before I saw them, via in particular Fangoria and Gorzone, so American magazines, and sending off these kind of catalogues, these black market catalogues in British kind of sci-fi horror magazines. Fear in particular was the one that I used. I'd send this catalogue over, and I'd pour through all these entries, these hundreds of these films, and there'd always be a little synopsis, what it was about, and then there would be, in some cases, how much violence, how much sex that was in the film. And then always underneath, what was the quality like? Because these qualities are invariably awful. You know, when I first watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it was mainly black and white. I was trying to adjust the tracking because of all these bars coming down. And it seemed like this dangerous, illicit film I was watching that I shouldn't be watching. I mean, if I'd have seen it on a 4K restoration back then, I don't know what I would have made of it. But it seemed illegal. When I was sent off for them, thinking, are they going to fleece me? I remember it being £15 for 2 films that were on a 180mm VHS cassette. So I think I got things like Cannibal Ferox, Nightmares of a Damaged Brain, Bloodsucking Freaks, Evil Dead, a few kind of Italian horror films. And what I liked about it, there was always a little bit of space at the end of the video. The guy would always put like a clip of another film on there, and it'd always be kind of like things attached to the video saying, I recommend you watch this. Something like, I recommend you watch New York Ripper or something like that. So, you can see that kind of community building just from that kind of consumption practice. And then when we went to festivals and conventions, there was always people selling, trading in mainly illegal kind of 3rd, 4th generation copies. And it was a kind of a unspoken thing that just happened.
They were always kind of whispered about. I think by the time I saw some of the original video nasties, I'd already seen lots of other horror movies, but they were still being distributed in VHS. I remember buying a couple of films under the counter in a slightly dodgy fashion with German subtitles because they had been released in Germany and copied. Some of the earlier ones I watched were things like Cannibal Holocaust, which purports to be a documentary about an Amazonian tribe and has these horrific scenes of torture, including scenes of actual killing of animals, including infamously a large tortoise, which I there are real moral concerns around that.
There were some films I never got to see. I never got to see The Exorcist. I never got to see that until 1999, where it came out in cinemas. It wasn't available until that time. And you build these films up in your mind, don't you, what they could be. Last House on the Left was exactly like that. You know, the poster, you know, for was in Mary, 17, she's dying, you know, for her, the worst is still to come. And I was thinking, my goodness, what could that be? You know, so all this built up, when you see the film, it really changes, I think, the reception of it, because you've been with these films years before you've seen them. Whereas today, it's much more accessible. It must change your viewing practices and how you receive these films.
My absolute favourite is The Evil Dead, which is directed by Sam Raimi, starring Bruce Campbell. It's become very famous through the sequels, and now there's a television show on Stars in the US. But I mean, that was spectacularly nasty, but also funny. You know, a film where someone gets a pencil driven into their ankle, where a young woman thinks she's holding her boyfriend's hand, but it's a severed hand. And most infamously, where a young woman is sexually assaulted by a tree, which was a huge focus of censorship at the time. It has its tongue firmly in its cheek. It's the original film about a cabin in the woods that really kind of pokes fun at the idea of having this group of people being kind of picked off. But yeah, it's pretty nasty at the same time.
Obviously, within the 150 so films that were on the kind of list, there are some classics. Suspiria is my favourite horror film of all time. And there's things like The Thing, The Beyond, Lucio Fulci's movie. But for me, when I watch these films now, I don't really receive them as kind of video nasties. Maybe I do see them as kind of quality horror. If I go back to think, what do I think a video nasty is? The first film that I saw that I thought, because I was always wanting to watch video nasty, but I couldn't because they weren't around and I was too young. And I remember getting Dawn of the Dead, which isn't a video nasty, it's not on the list. And the bit at the beginning where they storm the tenement building, and there's all those kind of zombie people in the basement in bags and stuff, and they go around and shoot them all, and it's dirty and it's grimy, it's sordid and scuzzy. I thought to myself then, this is a video nasty. You know, and that's what I mean. I don't know what a video nasty was, and that certainly wasn't. But I kept that idea that it has to be kind of a bit scuzzy, you know, a bit kind of unrefined, crude. And so in that case, the two films that I might select would be I Spit on Your Grave, the kind of rape revenge film, just because it really is a challenging, confronting movie that makes you feel kind of awful afterwards. And maybe Deodato's The House on the Edge of the Park as well. Because, again, it just seems a challenging, difficult kind of movie. Even now, today, when I watch it, you know, there are a lot of issues surrounding it, and it's a almost kind of unwatchable film in some cases. I think that for me is what the video nasty should be. It is something that should leave that gut punch at the end of the movie, rather than you commenting that's an amazingly put together movie, it's brilliantly directed, and the sound design, production design. It needs to be something a little bit more not unsophisticated, but unrefined. Another film that wasn't on there that I thought absolutely should have been is John Waters' Pink Flamingos. Because if there's a film with obscenity, that's your go-to film. I mean, it's a litany of obscene acts. I mean, purposefully, there's a rationale and reasoning behind it, of course, and I love Pink Flamingos. But that was never on the DPP's list. Although in all those catalogues I used to get, Pink Flamingos was always on there, and it was like, you've got to see this to believe it. You will not kind of believe what's in this film. So those may be two films that should have been on. Then Salo, definitely. I don't think anybody walks away from that without, you know, feeling horrible.
Hello and thank you for watching the first part of this Video Nasties documentary from BlumenFalck Film Talk. We hope you enjoyed this, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe and watch out for the second part coming next week.